Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. Yeah, we've been off air for a few days, sadly due to a family bereavement, but we are back with the news and views we hope are relevant to you. Well, in today's show, the Indian government are at it again. If they can't kill their political opponents overseas, they go and target their family and property back home in India instead, as Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon has just found out once again. Punjab's farmers are also having to fight yet again for their basic rights. Meanwhile, in the US, politicians are finally moving to officially recognise the Sikh Genocide. As north of the border, Canada announces an official reduction in immigration. But at the same time, Germany announces it's to increase visas for Indians, having not learned from North America's lesson in what happens when you allow the RSS to infiltrate your society so easily. And finally, a salutary lesson on drugs, alcohol and Sikhi. All this and more in today's show. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus. Welcome back, and welcome back to all of our amazing viewers. Thanks for being patient with us.
Indeed, and James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course, as usual, we'll be taking a look at loads of your great comments which have been filling up below the videos, and thanks so much for those. So James, let's get things started. What are you going to begin with today?
Once again, Mr. Pannoon is in the news because India has decided that since they couldn't get him, they're going to go again after his properties in his homeland of Punjab. They are basically, in North American terms, they are putting liens on his properties or taking the first step of seizure. And this means that he cannot do anything with the properties in terms of sales, in terms of, of course, maintaining them. So the government is essentially taking that first step of, as I said, seizing the properties. So as you can see, I'll pull up a map here and show you the properties that we're talking about. Once again, they claim that it's because of his criminality, his criminal activity, his allegations from the India government of his involvement in different terrorist activities and such. But the funny thing is that if you look at the actual accusations, they just really don't hold water. And let's take a look first here. So on the map that you can see in front of you, is, of course, where I've labeled ones and down below the two. So in Moga, he has one property, also one in Mohali, and then down in Bathinda, he has two properties that they have put the seizure notices on. And this, again, goes to the various codes in which they are accusing him of being in contravention of. And of course, this has to do with the 2020 Khalistan referendum. Now, the India government, as most of our viewers are aware, they see this as a threat to the sovereignty of the nation, and they also accuse him by doing this. It also upsets the peaceful living of all of the communities in the region of Punjab and throughout India. And if that's the case, then I think Modi and his government definitely have some answers or have questions to answer for, because they sure seem to be doing a lot of basically the same thing and making people very uncomfortable and not being able to get along, whether it is in the northern regions, the southern regions. It's all over India where people are very uncomfortable. They are not getting along well, and there's a lot of upheaval, a lot of fighting, a lot of violence, a lot of rapes, stuff that we've covered for quite some time, Angus. And basically what they're trying to say is that he is in breach of the he's basically being accused by the anti-terror agency under sections 10, 13, 16, 17, 18, 18B, and 20. And we're going to take a quick peek at that and see what those actually are, which is kind of interesting as well. And these all pertain to the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act of 1967, but we also know there's been amendments and changes since that time that really allow Modi a lot more leniency in terms of how he applies these different rules and these different regulations. So simply by speaking out against the Modi government or others in power, of course, that contravenes the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, just by speaking out and such. So with the referendum 2020, they make claim that under 10, it's penalty for being a member of an unlawful association. So they have declared the referendum 2020 as unlawful. People can't express their opinions or make their destiny or their goals and their dreams for a destiny known when it comes to government. So again, it goes on, and this is where it gets interesting because of the fact that they covered the one area here where the penalty for being a member of an unlawful association, but they've listed all of the parts of the act that they've listed are actually the punishment sections, not the actual act in itself that they're breaching or that they allege Mr. Panun is breaching. So again, unlawful activities. So because he is a part of the Khalistan referendum 2020 and part of Sikhs for Justice, they just declare that that is, again, terrorist activity. It is anti-India and a threat to the Indian nation as a sovereign and independent country. So they, again, just go on a whole list of, claims, again, raising funds, getting support for the Khalistan referendum. They make claims that through his campaigning, he is conspiring to have others sign up and have their voice heard in support of a independent Sikh nation known as Khalistan. So again, they go on to the punishments of all of these different acts and such, but they don't actually outline a lot of the activity. Now, I've actually gone through and pulled up the actual indictments, what we would refer to as indictments or allegations. And again, they are very baseless. They just go through these different points that I just showed you in the sections of the act that they are alleging that he is in breach of. So again, you can go through the screen slowly on your time and take a look at that a bit closer, or you can just pull it up online as well. And that's the India Code UAP Act 1967, and you'll be able to pull that up if you have interest in reading further into it. But you'll see that they are basically just pulling things out of their ass to make claims against him and to attempt to now seize his properties since they were unsuccessful in getting him in terms of their foiled assassination plot. And of course, Mr. Putin is once again speaking out, saying that Canada and the US need to put their foot down, that they need to start cracking down on Modi's agents that are operating within Canada, within the US, and even further than, of course, just the act of the foiled assassination attempt against him and the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Surrey, British Columbia, Canada. They also, are looking at other areas in which the government has been involved, the areas that they are still being linked to, and of course the ongoing diplomatic role between Canada and India that's ongoing. So a lot of information coming out, a lot of claims about the spy agency, about India's involvement in Canada, in the US, and of course that you're seeing on your screen now is a very recent information that was posted by Reuters, which is, of course, we know one of the most reputable news agencies and news feeds throughout the world. So again, this goes on to Mr. Putin's accusations against Modi, against the BJP government, and how this is continuing of the oppression and the genocide that you've seen in the U.S., that you've seen in India, and how the U.S. and Canada need to step down and really crack down on what's going on, Angus.
Yeah, I think that the most concerning, there's a lot of concerning issues to do with this whole story, but one of the most I would say, the most insidious parts of this whole story is how India target Panoon's family, his goods, his properties back in India. This is a theme that I often come across, particularly when I am discussing with activists here in the West, is that a lot of them have family and property back in the Punjab. And of course, the Indian government can't reach them over here in the West. Well, certainly not legally. And so they take this really cowardly route by targeting their families and their possessions back home in India, because they do have full control of that. And they use, under this sort of illusion of law, they send in law enforcement to seize these goods. They intimidate the families. They raid their homes. They take family members into the police stations and detain them for hours, if not days, to interrogate them, just because somebody is politically active overseas, somebody who's politically campaigning overseas against the Modi government. It's a deeply cowardly, deeply undemocratic way of proceeding. And I think this all really comes back to this whole issue of India. And India, at the end of the day, inherited the rule of law. It inherited a very powerful infrastructure from the British. They kicked the British out. They allegedly kicked out colonialism, although it does seem that India still remains a colony, or a number of colonies. And they've inherited this very complex, very mature, very effective legal system, which they've now twisted to suit their Brahmanical dominant control. And they're now basically, what they are is a totalitarian state wearing a very ill-fitting jacket of democracy. This jacket of democracy just does not fit what is actually going on inside the country, the nation of India. Clearly, they are using and abusing the law. They've now twisted and manipulated it to suit their own agenda, to maintain control, and also to oppress political dissent. And of course, these dreadful pieces of legislation like the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which of course Panoon is charged under, and the NSA, the National Security Act, which Amrit Pal has become a victim of, and many others, likewise Jaggi, etc., and loads of other political prisoners. This is not the actions of a democratic nation. These are not the actions of a nation that is governed by the rule of law. It stinks, frankly, James, I have to say. And it does worry me that India is trying to project itself onto the world stage as this great forward-thinking democracy and a future superpower, when in reality, you look on the ground, these are the actions that really matter. These are the actions that really India should be judged by. And these, unfortunately, are not the actions of a normal democracy, certainly not a democracy that we recognise here in the West, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And I mean, this isn't the first time that they've targeted his properties over in Punjab. As most recently as September, they went in and they searched these properties. They seized some personal items, mostly electronics or devices, so they declare. But again, there's nothing that came out of these searches that really of any substance. So they grabbed a couple of devices. I mean, when's the last time Mr. Poonen was in Punjab? So, I mean, do they really have any relevance to anything? And that's the real question. And when we look at how the India government is just trying to basically throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks these days in light of the diplomatic row. I mean, they're out there, they're making accusations against the Canadian Border Services Agency. They have gone publicly and posted the home address of a border services agent that they declare is a risk in participating in anti-India activity and so forth. And that has been since removed by Google. They removed it from the YouTube app, and that was a NewsX story. And the RCMP and, of course, Canadian security officials and the CBSA are looking into that as well, because that's, going even a step beyond any kind of rational information released by a government. You don't release an agent's home address where his family, kids or wife or anything, or himself. You can't release their home address and make them a target like that, especially when there's unsubstantiated claims such as India's making. So it goes back again. We're looking back to the 1980s right now, where this battle's going on. And we can go back to partition. We can even go back to the Sikh Empire. So it goes back and back. But something else that's really come up this week, Angus, is the U.S. Congress. And they are making waves because they want to now officially take steps to recognize the Sikh genocide of the. Sorry, I'm just going to pull that up here for us. And they want to make it official to recognize it as a Sikh genocide. And this is Congressman David G. Vladio, and he is from the California Congressional District, District 22. He is not only involved in this and spearheading it, but he's also got plenty of support from other members of Congress. So it really seems to be picking up some movement that they are going to introduce the resolution and quite possibly make that resolution pass to recognize the Sikh genocide of the 1980s and 1984 in particular. And this is huge because it is something that really gives recognition to the many that lost their lives, to the struggle that the Sikh community has been going through from the 1980s right through to current present day. And a lot of people don't realize how many atrocities are still going on throughout India when it comes to human rights, when it comes to minorities, and when it comes to the Modi government really clamping down on anything such as free speech. And they, as we were just touching on, that they want to be recognized as the world's largest democracy, and yet they just are playing all sides of the diplomatic coin. And really, they are not moving in the right direction, in my opinion, to make that a real credible movement for India, which really is too bad because as we talk about, we are not anti-India. We are not anti-Hindu. We are basically against the caste system. We are against the political structure that is oppressing their own citizens, that's taking the lives of people, that are not protecting the rights of women and children and minorities. So again, this is a very big step. And I'm going to go through this, just this press release here to give a couple of points. And Mr. Vladio, I believe it is Vladio, and he stated that the Central Valley is a home to a vibrant Sikh community, and he's proud to stand with them in demanding recognition and accountability for this horrific event in their history. This resolution is a small but important step to commemorate this tragedy and honor the innocent victims who lost their lives while practicing their faith. As we mark the 40th anniversary of the Sikh genocide, we remember a dark chapter in history that inflicted pain on Sikh families and communities. This is not just a distant tragedy. It hits home for us here in the throughout California, not just the valley where he's referring to, but where so many of our Sikh neighbors have shared their stories of loss, survival, and resilience. And this resolution is more than a symbol. It's time to recognize this horrific event that our Sikh community experienced. And that was from Congressman Costa, who again is joining Mr. Valadio and others such as Josh Harder, Vince Fong, and John Duarte. They are all moving for this resolution, and I think that it really speaks volumes as to how the world is really waking up to the atrocities that have been perpetrated against the Sikh community. So further on, the acting president of the American Gurdwara Committee, he went on to state that this resolution marks a pivotal moment in our ongoing quest for justice and truth. The American Gurdwara Barbadak Committee, and I apologize if I mispronounced that, representing Sikh religious institutions across the nation, has long advocated for the recognition of the atrocities committed during the 1984 Sikh genocide. We thank Congressman Valadeo for his courageous leadership and reaffirm our commitment to ensuring that stories of our martyrs are preserved and that justice is pursued relentlessly. So again, in today's political climate, it's a big step, especially considering that there's so many different diplomatic roles going on. The U.S., of course, in the current indictment of Mr. Gupta and the arrest warrant for a state member or state employee of the India government. I mean, it is really a hot time for them to step forward and take the chance to bring this resolution, Angus.
Yeah, I think this is fantastic news for many reasons. But when we look at the bigger picture, the sovereign state of Khalistan, the only way that Khalistan is going to happen is really with international support. It has to have the global buy-in to the whole concept. Now, this can only come through a sequence of many, many complex steps, but certainly one of those steps is awareness. And the Sikh community have done a monumentally massive job in raising the profile of the Sikh community. And I often go on about this. It really is inherent in every Sikh to go out there and protest against injustice, to wave that Khalistan flag. And it's wonderful to see right across North America and here in the UK and certain other parts of the world that the Khalistan flag is waved very proudly and very publicly on many occasions, certainly during protests. Now, all these little things, these many, many little things, these little protests here and there and everywhere are raising the profile of what Khalistan is. What it's doing is getting the general public in the West aware of what the issue is. Because, of course, you ask the average Westerner, whether it's in North America or here in Europe, saying, well, how conversant are you with the politics of India? And literally 0.1% will say, oh, yeah, I know a bit about India. And the rest will say, sorry, but I've not a clue. They'll say, well, isn't that the land of yoga or something? And unfortunately, that's just the case. But what's happening now is because the Sikh community are out there and campaigning actively, they're raising the profile from every possible angle. People are now asking questions. Well, we've seen these Sikhs walking around with the turbans on their head. We didn't really know much about them. We're learning about Langar because the whole concept of Langar is now being pushed out more publicly. So they're understanding what the concepts of Sikhi are. They're seeing the Khalistan flags at protests and things. So people are start asking, what is Khalistan? So people are now becoming more and more aware. And this recent push by the congressmen and women who are now pushing into legislation the recognition of things like the genocide, things like Transnational Repression Act, all these pieces of legislation are evidence that this push from the grassroots is really working. This push to raise the profile of the Sikh community, raise knowledge and awareness of what Sikhi and what the Sikh community is all about. It's having an effect at a bigger level, and it's creating legislation, which means that things like the Sikh Genocide are being recognised. Now, once the Sikh Genocide is recognised and officially recognised, again, it's bringing the awareness to the mainstream, and the Western populations are saying, what was this Sikh Genocide? What's it all about? That in turn is a stepping stone to educating the Western people. This is what the Sikh Genocide was about. And they say, oh, so the Sikhs have been oppressed since at least 1947. So they're buying in emotionally to the whole Sikh campaign. They're understanding why people are campaigning for Khalistan, and they're getting behind it because they are emotionally engaged with it. They understand the reason why Sikhs are so passionate about Khalistan. And through that, again, it's a stepping stone to support. People then start supporting the whole idea, the whole concept of Khalistan, because they see it is as justice being served. And don't forget, India is a very young nation. It's 77 odd years old. So it's very vulnerable as a nation. It's actually vulnerable to break up because it's that young that it doesn't have the long established union, let's say, like, for example, the United Kingdom or North America, etc. So it is vulnerable to a potential breakup. And now is the time that the momentum is building. Now is the time that on the international stage, the Khalistan movement is growing. It's growing support amongst outside the Sikh community. More and more people outside the Sikh community are getting to understand what it's all about and are therefore buying into the whole idea, saying, yeah, actually this makes sense. It's a perfect piece of democracy. The justification is there. etc., etc. And of course, India's transnational oppression has all added to that. So this, James, is another small stepping stone towards that essential mosaic of stepping stones that will create that big picture that will then finally push the whole concept of Khalistan over the line. That's what I reckon.
Absolutely. And I mean, when we look at what India is all upset about and Modi's upset about, he feels threatened by the Khalistan movement because it not only represents Khalistan and the Sikhs, but it also, can be just as applicable to, J&K and Manipur and other areas of the country that want to break off and become their own sovereign state. So it's going to be interesting to watch how this plays out, because the world stage, let's face it, in politics follows a lot when it comes to the U.S. So once they start officially passing resolutions to recognize the Sikh genocide, I can definitely see other nations following suit to start giving that the official recognition that it deserves, and to really pay honor to the many victims, not only in the 1980s, but ever since then, Angus.
Indeed, and here in the UK as well, there is a very large push from the community here in the UK to get the government to recognise the Sikh genocide. So yeah, the momentum is moving all in the right direction towards the establishment of Khalistan, which is great news. So, okay, let's move forward then with a few of my stories. I'll rush through because, again, we've got a lot to get through today. Now, the first story is actually, it's reflective of one of the in-depth strategies of the Brahmins and the RSS in India. And of course, they're tackling their whole expansion, their whole aspiration and ambitions as a nation by trying to spread the power and the reach of the RSS. And we often report how the RSS has infiltrated a lot of Western society, whether it's economically, commercially, or whether it's politically. And we've seen a lot of the RSS tentacles reaching out. Well, one of the interesting aspects to all this is how India has tackled the concept of migration and immigration. And what they've done is there's been a very clear, deliberate policy to try and push the Indian diaspora, to try and encourage Indians to move abroad and to spread, particularly if they are affiliated, particularly if they're Hindus, but particularly if they are affiliated in any way to the whole RSS agenda. And it's interesting that Modi has been on his travels again. He's been in Germany recently, shaking hands with the German Chancellor. Essentially, one of the topics of discussion was increasing the number of visas allowed for Indians into Germany. Now, it was announced just a few days ago that Germany, as a result of this, will dramatically boost the number of skilled Indians it permits to work in the country. Modi announced just a few days ago as he hosted Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Now, the German leader is on his third visit. Sorry, this was the other way around. This was Scholz visiting India. The German leader was on his third visit to India since last year. So this is a regular occurrence now. He's been seduced by Modi, and of course, the dangling a lot of these commercial carrots in front of Germany's greedy eyes. And it also brought several cabinet ministers into the same discussions between these two countries. Now, Modi said that Scholz's administration had decided to increase the number of visas granted annually to skilled Indian workers to 90,000. That's up from 20,000. So that's a huge increase. And Modi said, "I'm confident this will give a new momentum to Germany's growth. And when India's dynamics and Germany's precision meet, when Germany's engineering and India's innovation meet, a better future is decided for the Indo-Pacific and the entire world." And they first signed a migration agreement 2 years ago to facilitate mobility for professionals and students. Now, this is significant because, again, this is a very strategic idea from India. These so-called skilled workers, a lot of them also work in IT and other areas, but we've seen this in California as well. A very powerful movement of again, RSS affiliated, sneeze. It's gone, sorry, I was going to sneeze. RSS affiliated Hindus infiltrate some key positions in industry And of course, then they have the power and the influence to push out this RSS agenda. And we've seen it in big tech. It affects us, for example. It has a lot of indirect and direct effects because, of course, in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of skilled Indians, again, RSS-affiliated Indians, who are now influencing big tech. And, of course, that includes YouTube, Google, things like that. So they are the RSS are getting their tentacles into very powerful positions. And likewise in Germany, a big industrial hub of Europe, likewise the RSS are gaining influence in places like this. Yeah. Now, I want to contrast this with Canada. And it said only a few days ago that it was significantly curbing immigration targets in an effort to pause population growth. A shift that comes as public support for immigration declines. And this marks a big pivot for a country with a long-standing reputation as a destination for immigrants, including economic migrants from the developing world. Now, Canada's population jumped 3.2% in just 1 year, the biggest annual rise since 1957, and now stands at 41 million. And the rise was, of course, partly fueled by these new arrivals. Now, Trudeau said Canada needed to stabilise its population to give all levels of government time to catch up, time to make the necessary investments in healthcare, in housing and in social services. The Immigration Ministry has previously planned to let 500,000 new permanent residents settle in the country in the next 12 months, but the new targets have just been revised down from 500,000 to 395,000 next year and 380,000 for the following year. And then the year after that, 365. So there is a step down reduction in migration. And 23% of Canada's population was foreign born, and nearly 1 in 5 recent migrants were born in India. So the survey last month said for the first time in a quarter century, a clear majority of Canadians said there's too much immigration. 58% of Canadians believe the country takes in too many immigrants. That's up 14% from last year. In figures released last week, Abacus Data, who were behind the survey, found that 1 of every 2 Canadians say immigration is harming the country. Now, this is really interesting because this is a very liberal government of Trudeau who has been very welcoming to immigrants, much to the ire of the right wing. And yet, even the liberal government of Trudeau are now having to admit, hang on a second, we need to draw the line here because firstly, the infrastructure is just struggling to cope with the number of immigrants. But the reason I put these two stories together, it's actually highlighting the fact that the Western world now, I think, is waking up, and it won't admit it publicly, but it's waking up to the fact that countries like India and China is another key one here. And India and China have been both aligned with this same agenda. They've realized the power of migration, of sending out its people into Western nations, getting these people into academia, getting these people into the political sphere and into industry, powerful positions of industry. They can have a huge influence on policy making in the West to benefit their interests. So China and India have been very powerful in this whole strategy. And here we're now seeing that Germany, in its naivety, is saying, yeah, we'll welcome skilled Indian workers into our economy. What a great idea. Yet, you go downstream a bit, and Canada, who's been down this road, they've let in a lot of the Indian diaspora, but particularly the RSS, who came with an agenda. And I'm going to contrast this with the Sikh community in a moment. The RSS-driven migrants have deliberately got into positions of power, and they are affecting Canadian policy to benefit the Brahmins and the whole Brahmin RSS agenda of India. And as a result, the Canadian Liberals have now woken up saying, hang on a second, our politics has been infiltrated by bad actors, by these people from India who are now maligning and they are influencing our politics to benefit the RSS and the Brahmins, not for the benefit of Canada. And I want to bring in the Sikh, because again, there could be an accusation of hypocrisy here. The Sikh community has likewise deliberately infiltrated Canadian politics. But the difference here is the Sikh community and the philosophy and the ethos of the Sikh community is based on democracy. The whole concept of khalistan is based on Sikhi. Likewise, they have a track record of honouring the whole basic foundations of democracy. Contrast that with the Brahmins who were infiltrating the West. They come with a very different philosophy. They come with a philosophy of totalitarian control. That does not benefit the West. So whereas Sikh politicians and Sikh influenced politicians are doing it for the benefit of democracy globally and certainly for the interests of Canada as a nation, the RSS migrants are doing it for the benefit of India. They're doing it for the benefit of the Brahmins. They're doing it for the benefit of an undemocratic ideology. That's the difference. So, James, I think the West are beginning to wake up slowly but surely. They're not admitting it publicly, but they are deliberately reducing the Indian diaspora because of, I think, the damage that's been done to our nations here in the West.
Absolutely, Angus. And we've seen this even going back 6 months where there were the reductions of foreign students coming into Canada. As a result of that, people have been really picking up here in Canada. People tend to pick up a lot of sentiment towards immigration from the U.S. policy and U.S. attitudes. It spills over the border. It comes over in the media. So it's really, it rides the coattails of what the policy is in the U.S. in terms of the public sentiment. So it's important that they're starting to take a controlled stand on the immigration. But again, it's really follow up to the student programs that have cut back. And of course, we've seen that a lot of India's agents and the RSS have come over utilizing or exploiting the student visa programs. And of course, there's a lot of private, diploma mills in Canada, in the US, and in the UK that confirm enrollment of these students or so-called students who are actually here to act on behalf of the India government and intelligence organizations, Angus.
Yeah, and I think there's a high degree of naivety from Germany's part here. I don't think they have learnt the lessons that other nations have learnt with this infiltration from India and particularly China as well. So, and I think we mustn't forget that Modi was recently at the BRICS summit, embracing Vladimir Putin, shaking hands with Xi Jinping and all these other totalitarian leaders. And yet Germany welcoming Modi, saying, yeah, come on, let's have more Indians, even though India is increasingly aligning itself to essentially what are enemies of Western democracy. It is quite concerning. And again, I think it's a high degree of naivety from Germany. I think they will come to regret decisions like this. So, okay, let's move on to some domestic politics back in the Punjab. Over on the subcontinent. Now, we've talked a lot about the farmers' protests, certainly in 2020, 2021, and of course earlier this year. And it turns out, once again, surprise, surprise, the Punjab farmers have to go out into the streets once again to protest because, they are being shafted by the Indian government. And it's been reported over in the Punjab that the farmers once again are on the warpath against the centre and state government as a crisis of procurement and lifting of paddy crops has deepened in the grain markets across the state, and the government have still not resolved this issue. Now, this crisis has added to the general woes of farmers, who are, of course, mostly Sikhs and are already facing an existential crisis, owing, of course, to the anti-Sikh and anti-Punjab policies coming out of Delhi. And of course, what it's doing is it's just generating more and more unrest across the Punjab. Now, the harvesting season of what they call kharif crops is going on in Punjab as the paddy crop has matured. However, they've been left in the lurch a bit when they bring the produce to Mandis, which is the grain market. There are no buyers of the produce, or a much reduced number of buyers for the produce. Mandis are witnessing an unprecedented mismanagement by the government. And this is key here. It's a mismanagement. The question is it incompetence or is it deliberate? And that's where the conspiratorial theories start coming in. The produce is just not being bought. Some private traders are purchasing it, but at much lower prices. So of course, the farmers are losing out. The private traders, what's described here in one article, is they're looting the growers. Essentially, they're just exploiting the Punjabi farmers. The farmers are not getting the minimum support price, the MSP, as set by the government. So the system is failing. And secondly, a tardy lifting of the crop has further worsened the situation. So in such a situation, unsurprisingly, the farmers are out in protest. They've had no option but to hit the streets once again. And they've been staging protests right across the Indian administered state for the last several days in many different ways. They've intensified the protests, started blocking highways right across the state, and they are laying siege to railway tracks. All the mandis are witnessing the dharnas, that's sit-ins by the farmers, who are already facing multiple agricultural issues, and they're of course finding themselves in a deep economic mess. And these sit-ins have been seen across the Shambu and Kanuri borders. That's of course where the protests have been ongoing since early this year, and of course across many other different places in the Punjab, including the Gurdaspur district. The farmers, which of course, as always before, includes women in large numbers, have gathered at bridges and key bridges carrying flags. They shouted slogans against New Delhi and the state government, alleging that the governments are all set to ruin the farmers of Punjab. Now, these protests are for indefinite periods. The commuters, unsurprisingly, are suffering. Of course, the communities are trying to get to work, but the reason these protests are there is to highlight their plight. So it's important that the general public of India realise just how much the Punjabi farmers are being targeted by New Delhi. And the issue has turned out to be the biggest concern for the farmers these days, and it's hitting headlines, it turns out, in India, which is no bad thing. Of course, that's the reason why the protests are happening. And of course, it is reminded that the farmers' protests happened earlier this year at very large scales and back in 2020 and 2021, in which, of course, many farmers lost their lives protesting, finding themselves up against the full weight of the Indian law enforcement, who fired tear gas, rubber bullets, and all sorts of arms and ammunition, including live rounds, were fired at the farmers. So, unfortunately, we've got to report yet again the farmers in the Punjab have had to take to the streets once again to highlight their plight. And one asks, is it deliberate mismanagement or is it incompetence? It almost doesn't matter. The fact is, agriculture is the main industrial product of the Punjab. It will form the backbone of Khalistan once Khalistan happens. And I think it makes one wonders why the government and the state government are making such a mess of governing this huge industry of the Punjab. Is it deliberate? It could well be. We've speculated about this on a regular basis. Maybe they're just deliberately mismanaging it so that when the farmers protest, they can send in the army, they can send in law enforcement, they can take essential martial control of the Punjab, as they've had to do in J&K. Is it part of a larger agenda? They're trying to undermine law and order in the Punjab, and it's working. Again, they're having to send in law enforcement to take more and more control. Or is it just simple incompetence? The end product is the same, James. Ultimately, the Punjab is just not working as part of the Indian state. The Punjab, its whole economic infrastructure is basically falling apart. The agricultural industry is massive in the Punjab, and the whole management of it is incompetent. It is failing. And again, is it part of a wider agenda just to undermine the whole state of Punjab so that the Indian government can take greater control? But what it does mean is it is actually, again, law of unintended consequences. It's pushing more and more people to the argument, well, actually, if New Delhi can't manage the Punjab properly, then why can't we manage our own affairs? Because we can do it properly. We can govern Punjab ourselves in a much better way than New Delhi are. We can do it for our own benefit, and that is the whole foundational argument for Khalistan. Why can we not manage our own affairs, James?
Absolutely. And of course, we know that Modi and the BJP is very supportive of the corporate farmers that are trying to push out the small farmers. And that is a lot of the Punjab region are the independents, the family farms. And, they're being overshadowed by these corporate entities that are just trying to force them out as well. And what better way to control people, than to control the food that they're having access to?
And I think that's a very, very good point, because actually we've seen that to some degree here in the West. It's the big industrial giants, the big corporate giants who are taking over farming, and they're deliberately driving out the small farmers out of business. And of course, this is happening in the Punjab, where, as you rightly say, Modi is benefiting the interests and deliberately aligning with his billionaire mates and big industry mates to drive out the small farmers, to make sure they go out of business, so their farms and their land can be bought up by big corporate interests to then feed into that big Indian corporate machine, essentially taking control. So you're absolutely right, there is the economic agenda going on behind the scenes as well. So it's an ongoing story. We will follow that. Okay, let's move on to my third story. And this is an interesting one. And I think this story is an interesting bridge between India and the West. It's the story of alcohol and drugs. And it's also the story of Sikhi and the whole philosophy and morality of Sikhi. Now, one of our regular correspondents via email has sent in a very long email, a very interesting email, where he's highlighted the issue of alcohol and drugs and how the evils of these substances have really infiltrated certainly the Indian culture, and increasingly so Sikhi culture. And we'll just quickly go through his email. I'll pick out some of his key comments here. And this is Permjit Singh. And thank you, Permjit, for your email on this. And what he said is he strongly recommends that Satluj TV and Sikhs and Punjabis show even greater outrage against the producers of and actors in Punjabi films. And of course, he's referring to our active protesting about Gurdas Man. And I'll just quickly drop in here that the Satluj team were out again in force over last weekend, protesting very vocally against the Gurdas Man tour that's going on. But Permjit says that we should actually be focusing also on Punjabi films which have been depicting the consumption of alcohol by men and now by women, especially those who appear to be Sikhs. And Permjit says he personally abhors those who cultivate alcoholism in Punjabi films, both directors and producers, and who portray Sikhs merrily knocking back liquor. It's right that art portrays reality, but he doesn't endorse art that gratuitously promotes alcohol and in doing so lures impressionable viewers to also drink. And Permjit regards those Sikhs who sell liquor and cigarettes to shoppers as genuine Sikhs. Sure, they'll argue they're earning money for their own efforts and not living off state handouts, but consider the obvious conflict of what they're peddling to the basic principles of Sikhi. If that conflict isn't enough to show these retailers are not genuine Sikhs, then consider the lives they're directly and indirectly destroying through their peddling of alcohol and drugs to addicts. Also consider the additional strain their trade is placing on local health services. These peddlers of liquor might also argue that if they stopped selling liquor and cigarettes, someone else would do the same and sell drugs. That's likely, but stopping trading in drugs is not solely about money. By no longer peddling misery through the sale of drugs, I hope these retailers will feel a personal satisfaction of following Sikh principles that outweighs any dissatisfaction from their monetary loss. And Permjit is shocked because he's now seen such behaviour in young Punjabi women. He then shows a few examples of this in film, where he's picked out particularly youngsters drinking alcohol and serving alcohol in the films. And he says these films portray Punjabi women casually consuming alcohol. And Permjit's watched Punjabi films over many years. It's common in these films to see men, including these men who appear to be Sikhs, consuming alcohol and being drunk. It's only been in recent months that he's witnessed liquor consumption by Punjabi women, young and middle-aged. So we're now seeing it's crossing across from just men being cool and being young men. It's now Punjabi women who are being seen on screen to be consuming alcohol. And he continues, I think this unwelcome development is a reflection of the widespread peddling of alcohol and drugs across the Punjab. These films could also be an attempt to discredit Sikhs and Punjabis, or to encourage impressionable and gullible Punjabis and Sikhs to imitate actors they admire, or make them drinking alcohol is normal behaviour, or that it's cool to drink. If this degradation of Punjabi and Sikh culture and society and standards continues, where will it end? We'll soon see films of Punjabi and Sikh men and women, or even children, snorting or injecting their arms with drugs or lighting up cigarettes. I don't expect Sikh representative bodies that are being captured by politicians and or peddlers of drugs and alcohol to apply pressure on film producers and actors to stop, nor do I expect politicians to speak out. The reasons why they won't condemn or stop such behaviour is obvious. It's money, power. They're captured by politicians and peddlers of alcohol and drugs, and because of the plan to destroy Punjabis, Sikhs and the Punjab. We've seen with Amritpal Singh what happens if anyone dares to stop the peddling of alcohol or drugs. He is an exceptional politician. And Gurdas Man is just one person, but there is an entire filmmaking industry that should be of greater concern to you. Now, this is a really, really interesting email. I think it's very powerful because it does actually illustrate a bridge between the West and a Sikhi culture here. Alcohol and drugs are a known evil. They are drugs that undermine law and order. They are drugs that undermine society in a very insidious and a very dangerous way. Drugs, a well-known evil, and drugs are a terrible, terrible thing. They've infiltrated the West. They have just destroyed so many lives in the West. Likewise in the Punjab. And we've talked often about how drugs have we believe, deliberately been poured into the Punjab to have this very effect, to undermine the Punjab society, undermine the young generation, and destroy Sikhi from within. But alcohol is widely served, it's widely consumed in the West, it's legal, it's perfectly legal, but it is also a very insidious drug. Its effect is destroying so many lives, particularly when consumed in large amounts. It's all very well just having a glass of wine, but many people in the West, and now increasingly here in the Punjab, they are consuming greater amounts of alcohol, and likewise it is having a massive negative impact on society. And as Permjit rightly points out, it has a huge impact not just in behaviour and law and order, it affects the health services. The health services are struggling to deal with people who consume too much alcohol, etc., etc. In other words, these drugs have been rightly historically banned, as I understand from the whole Sikhi principles. It is not allowed to consume drugs or alcohol because they recognise very early on, and I'm literally talking hundreds of years ago, from the very foundations of Sikhi, they recognised just how bad and how morally wrong it was to consume alcohol and drugs because of the effect, the negative effect it has on good living, moral living, etc. And yet, across the Punjab now and across the West, these drugs are just almost drugs, and I include alcohol in that. They are a fact of life. Yeah. They are undermining society from every direction. And I think Permjit has a very powerful point here, is that once they are seen in the media, it becomes, the young generation watch films and they think, oh, it's cool to drink alcohol. It's cool to drink drugs because our idols on screen are drinking beer, they're drinking wine, they're drinking alcohol. They're thinking, yeah, it must be cool, so we'll do it too. And I think the media has a very huge responsibility to not do this because they know how influential it is. Yet we've seen in the West how drugs increasingly are now being seen on film. It's been cool to take drugs. It's been cool to smoke a joint. Again, marijuana, grass, hashish, these things which are the gateway drugs to more serious drugs, they are increasingly seen on film. And the youngsters see this and they think it's cool to do this. So I think Permjit actually raises a very big red flag here. I think, look, we need to actually raise awareness that our film industry, and particularly the Indian, the Punjabi film industry, are actually saying, yeah, it's okay to drink alcohol. Yeah, it's okay to take drugs. And the impact of that, combined with this deliberate policy to pour drugs into the Punjab, again, it's hitting that destruction of Sikhi society and Sikhi philosophy and the whole culture of Sikhi. It's damaging, undermining and deliberately dissolving it through these very subtle means, through celluloid, through film. And I think people need to be aware of this. And I think you're absolutely right, Permjit. I think we need to raise awareness and start putting pressure on the film industry, saying, hang on a second, it is not right to encourage the consumption of alcohol by portraying it as being cool on screen, whether that's alcohol, whether that's drugs or whatever. So James, I think, yeah, this is an interesting bridge between the problems that we have in the West that is now starting to be seen in the Punjab. I think the Punjab and the people in the Punjab actually need to stand up and say, no, this is not the right way. We've seen what's happened in the West. We do not want this in the Punjab. Would you agree, James?
Absolutely, Angus. And I mean, we've seen cigarette smoking taken out of television programming and out of the motion pictures for the most part. And yet they're bringing in more of the consumption of cannabis or marijuana and other harder drugs. And it's all about fear marketing in a sense that, whether it is pimple cream or beer, if you don't use this product or consume this product, then you're not going to get the girl, you're not going to be good looking, people aren't going to like you, you're not going to be accepted. It's all about fear marketing. And again, that is another push by the media to market those products to youth.
Indeed. So thank you, Permjit, for that email. I think it raised some very, very powerful points.
Very well said.
And I'll of course be interested to see what our audience think of that as well. So talking about our audience, as time marches on, let's move on to our comments section. Of course, we've had thousands of comments over the week that we've been away. So thank you to all of you who have poured in so many wonderful comments. Unfortunately, we just don't have time to cover so many that had such important talking points that we would love to talk about. So I've had to try and filter out and narrow it down to just a few that we can talk about. So our show last week, Sant Jarnail laid the foundations. I beg your pardon, this is my interview with Deepa Singh, a fascinating interview of a very active campaigner here in the UK, Deepa Singh, who was the subject of what I described in the interview as a good old-fashioned stitch-up by British law enforcement. And Freddie Mercury makes the comment, I remember reading about him and his sister getting arrested for fraud. Thank you for shedding some light on this. Well, as I did say in the interview, and Deepa explained the whole case, he was arrested and charged and convicted of fraud by the Charity Commission, but the whole thing was, as I said, it looks like an old-fashioned stitch-up by the British state, who are desperate to silence this very active Khalistani campaigner. So yeah, it's been a very enlightening interview. And Modi Drink Moot says, he's absolutely right. I've seen since the UK had a Hindu Prime Minister that they brought in thousands upon thousands of Hindus under James. We talked about the student visa issue, same here in the UK. Mainly from the Gujarat to spy on us. I've seen them flood our gurdwaras. Some stare at people almost like they're taking notes on who says what and who makes what speech. Yeah, how interesting this, James, that here in the UK, since we had a Hindu Prime Minister, that Gujaratis particularly have flooded British shores. They've now been seen in the gurdwaras, and they've been essentially, it looks like they've been spying on the Sikh community. Likewise, it's been reported the same thing in Canada, I gather.
Absolutely. And then, of course, you look at the U.S. politics right now and the potential of having an Indian president down there, potentially. I mean, where is that going to lead as well, right?
Indeed, and we did raise an eyebrow at Rishi Sunak's governance, a practicing Hindu, and his relationship with Modi. Yeah, it's clear a lot more went on behind the scenes that we didn't know that's benefited Indian Hindus and the RSS. Gobind Singh makes a very wonderful philosophical point. Don't worry, keep going. Who told you the way of Sikhi is easy? Waheguru give you power to go through these hard times. Great point. It's never going to be easy standing up for injustice, but this is the whole point of Sikhi. It's the whole point of the faith is to give you a backbone to fight against injustice. And I think this is a very, very wonderful, very philosophical point. Of course, it's not going to be easy. It was never going to be easy. Fighting back against this is going to be hard, but of course, it's all worth it. So, James, a wonderfully philosophical point there.
Absolutely. It really hits it right on the head.
Now, Hat B says, Indian government have covertly threatened Sikhs all over the world. It's been going on for a long time. The UK needs to step up and protect our Sikh population. What's the government waiting for? This racist RSS ideology has had too much influence on the UK. I couldn't put it better myself. We talked about it a lot. You're absolutely right. Will the UK government stand up for our community? Clearly they haven't been. Will this new Labour government do so? Well, time will tell. As I keep saying, I don't believe they will. I think they have betrayed already and they will continue to betray. We will see. Amrit Singh says the British establishment is terrified of the Sikh ideology because it will liberate you from any state. This is interesting, James. What Amrit's saying here is actually the Sikh community have always stood up to injustice. They've stood up to totalitarian control. They have stood up for the most unique fundamental basics of democracy. And it could be argued, as we will shortly in a second, that the British state actually isn't really a pure democracy. In fact, we have our own hidden deep state, as they call it, our own establishment. And the very fact that the Sikh community recognises this is actually in itself an inherent threat to the British establishment. This is why the British establishment are afraid of the Sikh community and are trying to silence it, because they believe, like India, that the Sikh community is recognising the British establishment for what it is, and they will start waking more British people up to that fact. So I think you're absolutely right. And this next comment from Punjabi Ghazal is a very powerful and important comment. UK is the worst country as far as freedom of speech is concerned. Even posting a meme can get you arrested. This is true. And this is a whole rabbit hole we don't have time to go down. Unfortunately, this could be the subject of a whole different show. I'm very concerned about the direction of the UK at the moment. You're right. Somebody posted a meme recently and posted on social media about our riots in the summer. Got sent to prison for 2 or 3 years for literally posting a comment on Facebook. It was inflammatory, but it wasn't that bad. And they've been sent to prison for 2 or 3 years. People who are posting memes on social media are now going to prison. Freedom of speech does not exist here in the UK at the moment. Our government, Keir Starmer, is turning out to be a communist. He is establishing an almost communistic rule. We are seeing a 2-tier level of law enforcement where we're seeing paedophiles let off, and we're seeing political protesters who are taken to streets. People who taken the streets, joined protests across the summer, shouted and waved their fists at policemen, have now been sent to prison for 2 to 3 years for legitimate political protest. I am very concerned about what's happening in the UK. We often call out India. Well, it's starting to happen here in the UK. I'm concerned. Punjabi Ghazal is rightly concerned. The Sikh community are concerned, as well you should be, because the Sikhs, as we've highlighted an article, I think earlier this year, and it was written by somebody on Baz News, the Sikh community need to wake up, because these so-called far-right protests, which were not far-right protests, they were protests by British people concerned about the levels of immigration in this country. Wake up, because the Sikh community are known for its protests against injustice, because they turned on these so-called right-wingers and sent them to prison for literally just going out and taking the streets. It's you next in the Sikh community. When you go out and protest, you will likely be sent to prison on spurious grounds under trumped-up charges, and then sent to prison with these ridiculously disproportional sentences, because the British establishment sees you as a threat to their control. That's what it's all about. And unfortunately, we don't have time to rant about this further, much as I would love to. But I think here in the UK, we need to wake up. James, I don't think you've had such an issue in Canada, but we need to be aware. We need to stay awake to this insidious creep, this mission creep of totalitarian, and here in the UK, it's communistic control.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the problems that we're seeing with globalization versus independence. And it's kind of being traded off, where we're losing our values, where we're losing our rights, where we're losing our protections as an independent, or as independent nations throughout the West, in exchange for globalization and trying to appease everyone. But it's just not going to work. And people need to realize that.
Yeah, there's a lot of dynamics going on across the world at the moment. And the Sikh community have been known for their stances against totalitarianism, against injustice, etc. And I think it's interesting. This comment comes out, presumably you are a Sikh yourself, and you're recognising what's actually going on. You're seeing what's happening here in the UK because you've seen it obviously for yourself firsthand as a Sikh. So yeah, we need to stay awake to this. Cousineau says, he made a long quote, and unfortunately we didn't have time to repeat this. And he quoted something from The Political Science of the Sikh Religion, written by an attorney. Now, the point actually I wanted to raise on this one, S. Simba, again, who's one of our critics, but regularly comes in with a counter-narrative. But he has actually made a very important point here. Do you know the meaning of genocide? Extermination of a whole race. Sikhs are still here. the figure of 300,000 is exaggerated. He's referring to actually this quote where it said 300,000 Sikhs were murdered. In 1948, killing of Sikhs is by Indian government figure. Well, he's saying that the Indian government claimed in 1948 only 3,356 were murdered, whereas others say it's 6,000 to 16,000. Don't forget, it was the supporters of Congress, Hindus and Muslims, who committed those crimes. So going back to partition and the massacres during the partition. And do you know when Gandhi was killed by Nathuram Godse, who was a Brahmin Hindu, 35,000 Brahmin Hindus were killed in Maharashtra by the supporters of the Congress Party Hindus. So what S. Simba here is saying, and this is actually a valid point that's worth discussion at greater length when there is time. When is a genocide? What do you actually class as a genocide? Because, of course, Hindus have been massacred in large numbers in India on several occasions, unfortunately. Partition, again, that dreadful time of partition when millions were murdered, Sikhs, Muslims and Hindus. So what actually do you actually define as a genocide? And this comes back to, again, what we were talking about earlier, James, about recognising the Sikh genocide. What actually is a genocide? Now, we've often talked about the Sikh genocide in 1984, and that occurred after the murder of the assassination of Indira Gandhi. And unquestionably, there was this genocide across India of Sikhs. But of course, that genocide extended right across the 1980s and 1990s, where hundreds of thousands of young Sikhs were murdered in cold blood across the Punjab. Is that a genocide? Many argue, yes, it is. There was many who argue a genocide in 1947. So I think S. Simba actually has a valid point here. Look, what actually is a genocide here? We need to be very clear what we're defining. I think legally it is being defined in the US right at this very moment. In the UK, likewise, we're trying to define what is the genocide that we want recognising. I think, again, we're saying it is that genocide of November 1984. But many could argue, well, what about the genocide of 47? What about the genocide of the 80s and the 90s? And Modi Drink Moot comes back with an interesting point. The real numbers will definitely be over 1 million because the Sikh population actually didn't rise for 20 years. And here is an indirect symptom of, or at least some smoke pointing to the fire. Well, the fact that the Sikh population didn't increase officially by 20 years actually says, well, there must have been an awful lot more that were killed than we actually realise because the population didn't change over 2 decades. So, but yeah, James, I think this opens up an almost legal argument. What actually would you define as a genocide? Because all these other communities could say, well, we were genocided as well.
Absolutely. And it's, it's something that people look at, and generally speaking, people would look at it as an action that's taken to strip a population that's a minority, to strip them not only of their right, their independence, and their identity, but to strip them of the lives of that community as well. But again, it is being redefined at this time through the United Nations, through several other countries. And we'll bring you an actual definition as laid out on the different levels one day. And this way you can kind of compare the variances that people view it as.
Indeed. Okay, we'll rush on because we've got a lot of comments still to get through. We're already out of time. Parminder Singh says he's not a supporter of Khalistan, but the actions of RAW and the Indian government are stupid. I think they started to think they are owners of India, and they're not. And then Hardal comes back and says, no love lost by G. This is, I think, is a wonderful reflection of democracy, actually. Because Parminder says, look, I don't support Khalistan, which is absolutely your prerogative. You don't have to. Of course you don't have to support Khalistan. But you are recognising that what the Indian controlling regime are up to is just not right. And Hardal Singh comes in with this lovely comment, no love lost. Of course, it's basically saying, yeah, you have we respect your right not to support Khalistan. This again is what the Khalistan referendum is about, is democracy, is that people who turn up to that referendum have the absolute right to say, no, I fundamentally disagree with Khalistan. It should not be established. And likewise, those who support it can vote. And this is in just a little nutshell, this is democracy in action. And this is Parminder saying, I don't support Khalistan, although I recognise that what the Indian government are up to is not right. And Hardal Singh says, you're absolutely right. I totally respect that. No love lost, but thank you for your comment. So to the pair of you, thank you for that little wonderful snapshot of how things should be debated in the public domain, James.
Absolutely.
Chan Singh says, finally the Sikh voice is being heard from Western journalists. We've no issues with Hindu, Muslims, Christians, etc. Yeah, and again, this comment reflects the whole concept of Khalistan, is that, firstly, well, thank you that the Sikh voice is being heard, and that the Sikhs have no issue. They have always lived very amicably, side by side with all the other communities, and that is what Khalistan will be about, that where every community will be welcomed in with open arms and will live side by side under the governance, under the ethos and philosophy of Sikhi. Jack Frost says, likewise, it's a breath of fresh air listening to some real truthful reporting. India's been pushing their propaganda very hard. Indian bots and Canadian media channels have been working overtime, Jack Frost says. Absolutely right. Social media, even the mainstream media, has been absolutely flooded with the RSS, Hindutva, IT cells. The bots are out there. They are desperate. They are terrified of what's happening. They realise they've been caught. The Western media is realising what the RSS have been up to, transnational oppression. And so, of course, their counterattack is, as we report, is being a bit weak, pathetic, incredible in the literal sense. They're desperate because they know they've been caught. And then JV Singh says, great presentation. Well, thank you for your comment. You present the Sikh and Khalistan perspective fairly. Well, that's what it's all about. Addressing the anti-Khalistan perspectives fairly. Well, I hope so, because we do respect those people who do not support Khalistan. If you can argue against it validly, we totally respect that right, and we will stand up for your right to be anti-Khalistan. That's what freedom of speech and democracy is all about. Now, you rightly slapped me on the wrist here, and I do apologise. You said that I shouldn't undermine the rigour and hard work that goes into a PhD. Of course, I did make a very flippant comment about doctorates, and I do stand by to some degree what I did say, because I have encountered many people, particularly on social media, who are doctors, and they are doctorates in what I would say are pretty ropey subjects, pretty loose subjects. But I did caveat that by saying, and as you rightly say, genuine PhD involves genuine addition to human knowledge after painstaking research. You're absolutely right. Many PhD doctorates I do respect, because I know the amounts of hard work and genuine research that goes into it. At the same time, I have met many people who've basically just been students for an extra 2 years and have just basically just done, I would say, pretty weak research into pretty meaningless subjects just so they can get a doctorate. So unfortunately, I have to say that my respect for doctorates is a little bit sits on two stools here. I do respect scientific and well-researched doctorates, but I don't respect those who essentially just stayed on as a student for 2 years just so they can get a doctorate after the name. And I see that particularly in many of the arts subjects. So yes, a rightly slap on the wrist, but I do caveat with what I said with my conditions attached. So thank you for doing that. All right, we must rush on, James, into our final page of comments. Shiva Roy says, your false news is fun for us. These two idiots are funny. Well, James, we are comedians.
We're there to entertain. It's a good thing the camera only shows my top half, or they'd see my clown shoes.
Well, I'm delighted that you find us entertaining and funny. We are here, hopefully, God willing, every day to entertain you. Please keep watching. Please keep your comments coming in, because it makes us laugh too. And we're delighted that you enjoy our news too. So keep your comments coming. And Harjeet Rosha, hello James and Angus. Well, hello to you, Harjeet. You've really hit hard on the head of Modi and his associates. So yeah, we have angered them greatly. So my advice to you both is to do your next programme wearing helmets. I think, James, we should really keep our heads a little bit lower below the parapet, because we've been quite rude about Narendra Modi and his various state mechanisms.
Yeah, I just laugh. Yep, it's he's gonna need a big army to carry this fat ass and off to bury it.
Well, all I would say to Narendra Modi and Raw and all that lot is, I'm sorry, but if you just start acting a bit more democratically, we wouldn't have to be so rude about you. So it's very easy. And as I say, the easiest solution to all this is just carve a little bit of northwest India out. It won't hurt you or damage you in any way, and you'll do everybody a favour. Let Khalistan happen, and then we can all move on and be friends. That's what it's all about. And S. Baines, this is actually, unfortunately,
allow the referendum to happen. Yeah.
Indeed, and S. Baines makes a very good comment here, and it's a shame we don't have much more time to talk about it in more detail. But it's an economic argument, and actually he's saying that India's trapped. The BRICS economies are trading in the Chinese currency, the yuan. No one wants rupees because India isn't producing stuff. India is a net importer. It's not a net exporter. So that's why the rupee is becoming weak. It is essentially a weak currency, which is trapping India economically. China is its biggest trade partner. China can swamp India with goods. China is the biggest producer in the world. China is the biggest exporter. It's flooding India with goods, and of course the Indian money is flowing out towards other countries, particularly China, and this again is weakening India economically. Right. In the short term, the rupee will keep slipping, even with the BRICS acting as the backstop. In the long term, India is weak. China, in relation, will keep growing, and they have a clear idea as to what Chinese interests are, which is not the case for India, except maybe self-glorification, which is what India is really good at, which is very true. This country is moving to a breakup. Yeah, a very powerful comment here about the whole economic argument. India's currency is weak. India economically, actually, ironically, even though it's a massive market, it is essentially a net importer. People don't want rupees. That it's not a currency that the globe wants. And this ultimately is weakening India as a nation. And as S. Baines argues, this is what this could potentially lead to the breakup of India, James. I think this is a very important point.
It very much is. And again, we could go on for quite some time on this, so we'll just move on to the next.
So thank you, S. Baines, for that great comment. As I say, it's a shame we didn't have longer to talk about it, because it does raise a lot of very interesting arguments here. Final comment of the day. Adam Harris says Sikhs deserve dignity and respect in their homeland, Khalistan. Well, James, I couldn't finish the show on a better point, could we?
No, absolutely not. I totally agree.
So on that wonderful final comment, we must draw things to a close. Don't forget to keep your comments coming, and thank you for the so many wonderful comments we've received over this last week. As I said, that unfortunately we didn't have time to do so many great comments that came in that really were worth justifying to talk about. But keep those comments coming. We'll have lots of shows hopefully coming up over this week, so keep them coming in. Don't forget you can email us directly at Satluj TV. That's message@satlujtv.com if there's anything you'd like to talk to us directly or bring to our attention. But in the meantime, we must draw things to a close. It is a goodbye from me, and it is a goodbye from James.
Goodbye, everyone, and a quick shout out to Ashdeep Baines on the Vancouver Canucks in the NHL. Got its first hockey NHL goal and a game winner. So we know the Punjab community has been excited over the last 24 hours for that. So congratulations.
Indeed, and thank you so much for watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.